To begin our afternoon programming, please welcome a Latina leader who channels her culture from the series Gentified and Vida. You can catch her in the recent movie East of the Mountains, actress Annie Gonzalez.
Hey, hey, hey! Welcome back, everyone. Oh, look at the keep dancing salsa up on this stage. Don't get me started. I'm doing a little solo out here.
Camina!
Yes. Welcome back, everyone. I know we're probably a little antsy, a little laggy from the lunch, but let's keep our energy high because we got some brilliant speakers coming out. A special thanks to the amazing Chef Grace. How was the meal? Was it delicious, y'all? Yes. And the other chefs that she collaborated with this week to bring us sensational food that you guys just enjoyed. And also, please be kind to the wait staff as well, because we're all working here. We all hot, we all tired, dehydrated with this elevation. Before we resume our afternoon programming, I have 3 reminders. Don't forget to register for the Thursday afternoon programming, which was created especially to bring in additional Aspen community members. We're so thrilled to share with them the screening of the film Unidad, a live interview with Katrina Van, I'm gonna try this, Van Heuvel? Say it one more time. Katrina of the Hill. Okay, well, someone wrote Katrina Van Heuvel. I like that. Katrina of the Hill. Everything's an interpretation. You know what I mean? When we're translating from English to Spanish, it's going to be a little fun over here, right? And a conversation programming at your Event Raizado Festival app or at the links across the Latinx House social media and website, thelatinxhouse.org. Woo! Okay. And don't forget that all the Raizado programming tomorrow is scheduled at Hotel Jerome. If you haven't been yet, you are going to love it. It's a beautiful little step into history. Lastly, don't forget to share across your social media network all the important happenings here in Aspen. Tag the Latinx House, tag me, and use the hashtag RaizadoFest. Now, let's jump right back into our afternoon sessions. The next panel couldn't be more timely, looking at the role and responsibility media has in this age of rampant disinformation. As we all know, misinformation has spread at alarming rates where people consume content such as on social media and in the news. I mean, come on, right? False news is all over the place. Our panel will shed light on the role of a functioning media to inform the public about a range of issues from healthcare to immigration to national and local elections. We want to thank our hosts for supporting today's session. Luminate, thank you so much. Now, please, we can give a round of applause to them. Thank you. You give us our flowers while we're here. Now, please welcome the moderator for today's panel, the media role during the age of disinformation. He is the vice president and head of the Washington, D.C. office for Luminate, Felipe Estefan.
Bueno, sí.
And Axios Latino, Russell Contreras. Amazing. And she is journalist and contributor at ABC News, Maria Elena Salinas. Yes. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos, a todas, a todes. How are you, mi gente? I know this is the after lunch panel, I know. But stick with me, I think we'll have a fun time. So I'm Felipe Estefan, I'm the Vice President for the Americas and the Head of Advocacy and Influence at Luminate. Luminate is a philanthropic organization that focuses on building communities where everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from, can have the rights and the information and ultimately the power to shape the decisions that affect us all. And that includes funding work to counter disinformation. That includes funding work to support media and journalists, as well as work around narrative change. And it's a great honor to be here with everyone from Raizado, so thank you for your partnership and your support. This panel is called, let me make sure I get this right, The Media's Role During the Age of Disinformation. And I think as we enter the panel, I just wanted to offer some quick framing remarks before I introduce the incredible panel that is going to help us discuss this topic today. And to start, I think I'm going to say something that is perhaps obvious for most of you, but it's that misinformation and disinformation are spreading at very urgent rates. Raise your hand if you're in some family, and by family I mean Latino family, tía, abuelo, abuelito, primo, text chain, WhatsApp chain with your family. Raise your hand. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about when your like crazy uncle starts sending you some message about the CIA and the COVID vaccine and that, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's what we're talking about here. And I think all joking aside, I think it's important to mention a couple things. One is that this and misinformation knows no borders. I think one of the things that has shocked me the most, being Colombian but living here in the United States, is seeing the exact same memes, the exact same messaging lines that are being used in US elections in the most recent presidential election in Colombia. Some of the exact same racist attacks, sexist attacks against women candidates were the very attacks that the now Vice President of Colombia, Francia Marquez, was facing. Exactly the same images, exactly the same mechanism to spread disinformation in an articulated and sophisticated manner. And I think the other one that it is important to highlight as we enter this conversation is that disinformation has a very real impact in our communities. Let me be as clear as I can possibly be. Disinformation kills. Disinformation is killing our democracy. Disinformation is killing our communities. And just think about the person that didn't get that COVID vaccine because of vaccine disinformation. Just think about the person that is not taking action to join the growing global movement to prevent and mitigate climate change. Whether it is urgent challenges of today or challenges that us and future generations will face, this and misinformation are killing us, are killing what is dear to us, are killing our way of life, our systems of government, our ability to be empowered in our communities, and our very lives and the lives of our families. So we have to do something about it, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm gonna hopefully get these three people to tell us how we solve this problem. And so let me introduce you so that we can get into the conversation. Immediately next to me is Suzanne Gamboa, who's a senior national reporter at NBC News and NBC Latino. Give it up for Suzanne. Suzanne's reporting is mainly on how the Latino community is reshaping the United States. She has also covered immigration, the border, racial justice, many of the issues that are closest to the Latinx community. And Suzanne previously worked at the AP and the Austin American Statesman. Next to Suzanne, we have Russell Contreras, who is the race and justice reporter at Axios and Axios Latino. Give it up for Russell. He covers the policies and agencies of the heart of the administration of justice and how they impact people of color. He's the co-author of the Axios Latino newsletter, has also previously worked at the AP, the Boston Globe, and the, you're gonna correct me here, Russell, the Albuquerque Journal. Yeah.
It's part of New Mexico.
And, and you're currently working on a book about JFK and the Latino community, is that right?
Exactly.
Great. And next to Russell, she needs no introduction, a legend of journalism. Please give it up for María Elena Salinas. She has been described by the New York Times as the voice of Hispanic America. She's currently a journalist and contributor at ABC News after spending more than 3 decades at Univision. María Elena's philanthropic work also includes providing scholarships for the Latino journalism scholarship fund that supports Latinx community members who are studying journalism, as well as serving on the board of the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, and that continues her long life mission to inform, inspire, educate, and empower the Latinx community. Yeah. Great. And so I'm going to start with you, Maria Elena. How are you seeing the impact of disinformation on the Latinx community? How does it differ between English language content and Spanish language content?
I do think that it's probably one of the communities most impacted by misinformation because they're being misinformed in two languages, in both Spanish and in English. And, you know, I live in Miami, which is the epicenter of misinformation. I hope there's no one from Miami here that will get insulted, but, and if there is, you know, I'm speaking the truth, I'm saying the truth. And there, you know, the Spanish language media has a very strong presence, not only Univision and Telemundo local stations, but there's also independent TV stations there, and there's several radio stations, which is where the misinformation generates. So I do think that that they're affected, and they're affected in many ways. It was very interesting how you said that misinformation kills, and we see that because it's not only about politics, it's also about health. During the pandemic, there was so much misinformation. I remember hearing once that that there were farm workers who didn't, in Florida, in Central Florida, that didn't really have access to vaccines. So there was this whole movement to make sure that they would go to them and get them vaccines. But a lot of people didn't want to get vaccines. And my stepdaughter was a volunteer during this process. And she said people told them that they were going to put a chip in their arm that would track undocumented immigrants.
Yeah, the Bill Gates
that kind
chip.
Of, exactly, yeah. That kind of thing. So that's what they believe. So, I mean, I see it all around me because I live in the community and I talk to people around me and I hear the types of things that they are saying. And, you know, I think it's a very dangerous thing, a very, very dangerous thing.
And Russell, how are you seeing it in terms of the coverage that you're doing from Axios' point?
Well, interesting, we saw through our reporting in 2020, when we asked Latinos, or we investigated, where do they get their information from for political coverage? We found that a large portion of Latinos got their political information from YouTube. They went to YouTube, they were searching for information, and granted, it's not probably people in this newsroom. It's your tío who works at the mechanic shop, it's your prima who works at the salon, those who've been telling to go vote all these years are now finally to go vote, and they're looking for information. Why are they going to YouTube? Well, they don't see us in mainstream media. They're looking for voices that speak to them. And if they go to a lot of the cable opinion channels or they go to news sites, they don't see their voices. There are no Latino columnists at major newspapers. There are no Mexican-American columnists at the New York Times or the Washington Post. So it opens up a venue to go to YouTube. And the most viewed video of the YouTube 2020 campaign was a video from the Trump campaign, very simple, had MMA fighter Jorge Masvidal basically give a speech and make fun of Joe Biden dancing to Despacito. It was everywhere. But if you watch that video, it was the most viewed video of the campaign. You got algorithms pointing you to other misinformation about vaccines, about the upcoming allegations that there was election fraud, about the migrants coming from Central America are connected to MS-13, a number of information. So it existed. So those primos, those tíos who were going to YouTube got caught up in the algorithm of misinformation. And there are many types. There's misinformation where they're just not giving you the full story, and there's disinformation, which is just outright lies, incorrect stuff, stuff that is just so out there. And malinformation, information there to hurt you, put your personal information out there to hurt a particular candidate or a particular person, to get all the trolls to attack someone. So those are things I saw building up, and we can talk about this later. It is very easy to track it in English, but very difficult to track it in Spanish.
And there is less resources that are being devoted to Spanish content moderation by big tech. And I just wanted to compliment what you were just saying. At Luminate, we did a study in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico during the pandemic to gauge attitudes towards democracy. And consistently, every measure in every country, people 16 to 25 years old were saying that they had a least favorable view of democracy than older people. So then we try to figure out why would that be the case? And we then went in and did another study, a deeper qualitative study. And what we found is that youth were primarily building their public opinions and their political opinions through influencers, through social media influencers, which then begs the question that you're raising, Russell, which is, what are those algorithms incentivizing those influencers to do? What kind of content are they being incentivized to post? Is it kind of nice, kind debates about issues, or is that incendiary content? And if that is the primary way that youth are building their political opinions, what does it mean about the way that they will participate in politics? So those are some of the questions that we're wrestling with here. I want to stay in the kind of diagnosis of the problem. Suzanne, how are you seeing the impact of this and misinformation?
You know, I like to think about this word disinformation because when I was just getting my makeup done, I asked the ladies, they asked me what I was talking about, and I said disinformation, and it was like, what? They didn't know what I was talking about. So I had to use other words, lies. For me, I see it as spin on steroids. We've always had spin in political coverage. I, as a reporter, now some of you, that's your job, you have to spin. But I, as a reporter, am supposed to cut through that spin. So I really basically see, because of the internet, because of the algorithm, because of all of this, we're like in this hyper level of spin. The impact on me, I think more on the community. I think this sort of precedes the disinformation now, but the impact on our democracy, I think, is best summed up with the voter ID law. If you want to talk about disinformation, incorrect information, the news about the fraud in-person voting was some of the worst disinformation we've had, and has had the worst impact, I think, not the worst, but has a horrible impact on what are a very basic fundamental democratic principle of voting. And people, you know, we have found in investigations, everybody's found in investigations that were done that they didn't turn up fraud, and yet I saw headlines, a couple weeks ago about DeSantis finding 20 people who may have voted illegally because they were incarcerated and they're not supposed to have voted. And it's like 20 out of how many? And I get very frustrated to see that within my own industry. So, you know, the impact is there on democracy. We've also seen violence. If you don't forget that we had Pizzagate, and that was off of the whole idea that the Clintons were running a child porn or child trafficking ring. And what happened in D.C.? You know, they went and shot, the person went up and shot the pizza place in D.C. So definitely there's an impact. For us as journalists, the impact is that it is much more challenging. It continues to be challenging to do our job. However, I say that with the context of those of us who are people of color who have been in our jobs for years, and Russell, and I put all of us in there, we've been doing this for a while. We have, for a long time, had to fight information that was out there to tell the true story of what was going on in the community. So if you take the voter ID law, I remember covering that and I was doing just a stories like how true is some of this fraud stuff. I was working for AP at the time. I think this was in the mid-2000s. And the story, I went and found an AP story out of Texas that you know, as you're researching, that said, you know, described what was happening and had one line in it said, but this law isn't expected to affect anyone. And I was shocked. I was like, I can't believe that's an AP. And it made me think back to my career coming up in the AP when this was like the mid-'80s. And the fights I used to have to go through to try to get somebody to recognize, an editor to recognize, in these all-white newsrooms, worse than they are now, to recognize that a movement of a polling place was an issue, even though it just happened in the Latino community, in a small community, and it was one place, and it didn't really matter to the larger thing. To be able to report something that was really important. So there's an impact. The impact for those of us in the communities of color has been there for a very long time. When you talk about impact on democracy, the democracy that we've been striving for so long has never arrived for us, but is now even harder to get to as we make progress.
If I may, I wanted to add something else about how people who in Spanish are lied to. Just like they said, just like Russ was saying before, a lot of it has to do from social media, and they watch videos on YouTube. But now there's a lot of misinformation coming from Latin America. And the way that they see it, the way that they post it, is you see a woman maybe sitting down, reading a teleprompter on a set that looks like real news, reporting things, maybe about the war in Ukraine, because we know that Russia has infiltrated Latin America. And they believe it because a lot of people still have roots in their countries of origin, so they still believe what they see coming from there. So that affects it a lot. And that just brings me down to one of the main problems is that people don't trust the media because they don't know the difference between what is a journalist and what is a commentator. And that really kind of started with a 24-hour news cycle where, yeah, in the beginning it was news, but then so many opinion programs came on, but the way they look the same. You have what looks like an anchor sitting behind the desk with graphics, with chyrons. It looks like a newscast. It must be news. It must be the truth. And people are getting lies. They're getting someone's opinion. They're not getting facts.
Yeah, and disinformation, as we were saying, has a great power to transcend national borders. It knows no borders. And I think this conference is called Raizado, as we're all deeply rooted in different places, most of us, most of our families, and we see how information shifts and moves. I mean, I've seen it certainly in Colombia as it pertains to Venezuelan refugees and migrants that have come into Colombia, and just the organized effort to spread disinformation about them, and then how that seeps into electoral politics in Florida, for example. And so there is a very strong connection there. And I wanted to piggyback on what you were saying, Suzanne, about the impact that it has had on how journalists do their jobs. And perhaps I could come to you, Russell. How do you think that because this panel is media in the age of disinformation. So for you as a reporter who is fact-checking, producing quality information to inform citizens and hold the powerful to account, what does it mean to be doing your job in this age of disinformation?
Well, you can go to a scene and talk to somebody who is just saying the most outlandish things, and you're trying to quote this person. You don't want to be condescending and say, no, you're wrong, no, tonto, that's not true, right? But you're trying to meet them where they are, so you see how damaged they are and what they're saying, and sometimes you can't use them because they're not giving you anything useful. But you can point out that this belief has now penetrated the mainstream. And then you see them attacking you if you repeat, like if you're some part of a conspiracy. A good example right now, something that is made mainstream is the idea that there's white replacement theory going on, that Latinos are conspiring with African Americans to displace whites in positions of power and money. Now, I was with Suzanne last night. I don't see how we can conspire to anything. We couldn't even agree on what would happen for advertising. We couldn't even agree on a drink. So the idea of all of us coming together and to come up with some sort of conspiracy is ludicrous. But yet it has penetrated the mainstream, that we somehow, after all these years, are conspiring to displace white folks. And I see that, and then when you write about it, I get hate email. I've got hate me emails at all, and I've collected them because I want to put them on an art display one day. But you get them, and you get threats. I got some folks who hit me up on Instagram and basically said, I know where your daughter goes to school, right? They got the name wrong, and they assumed it because she goes to another school. But it was like alarming, and I had to tell folks at Axios. A colleague of mine, another Latina colleague in Boston, was writing a story about the false information that a Boston Children's Hospital was providing gender transition care to children. And she wrote it, and she asked an email. Somebody shared her email, and she got blasted all over the place, attacked. So this is now we're just not only doing our jobs, but our lives are now at risk, right? And it's easy to me to be like, bring it, let's go. I come from Cholos, we can take it on. But you don't want to put yourself in that position, and you don't want to put your colleagues in that position, because you have a job to do. And we're trying to do our best, not make it about us. And what they're trying to do is hook you. They're trying to go to your social media account and see if you have any bias, and then they're going to amplify it. And they do it with photos, they'll doctor it, and that's something we always have to watch.
And Suzanne, you were talking about the terminology you were using to describe what you were going to discuss today. And of course, the famous term that has emerged is fake news. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like that term has been weaponized at times against serious journalist. Is that something that you see? How is disinformation impacting the way that you do your job as a journalist?
You know, I think it's funny because I just feel like I've always had to do the job that I do, and that's just trying to get out accurate information. I think it's more challenging for people who work in the Spanish and English space, because they have to deal with it twice over, right? So, I mean, we have stuff fact-checked all the time by editors. We go through 2 or 3 editors. For me, I think it's more difficult because I've become so disenchanted. I've become so, in some ways, I'm always fighting this, does it really even matter if I write this story kind of syndrome, which is terrible. One thing that, you know, I went out to Uvalde when the Uvalde shooting happened, and, you know, you all saw that the families wanted to go into the school, and they were pushed back by police. And one thing that really struck me was the fact that the people, the families, the parents, were so unwilling to talk to media. They talked to a few people and told them what happened, but everything was passed through video, through social media. There was video of, like a 58-minute video of the families trying to get in that was posted in Reddit that I got through a source who happened to be on Reddit and saw it. But I had, before then, had already talked to a neighbor or somebody who was already getting the video and was trying to get him, and the person he was talking to wasn't sure. And part of that had to do with the community, that there are a lot of people in the community that work for DPS or work for Border Patrol or whatever, and so I understand that. But you knew that they were angry about the government the officers not doing enough. And they heard the news conference, and it took a long time for one of them to come and talk to us. That said to me a lot about mistrust, and that is very, I don't know, it's just disappointing. It's hard to deal with because you want to keep informing people, and I know that I'm in competition to get people to click and share my stories when they're getting all this other stuff from WhatsApp and YouTube and sharing that. And I have to, you know, rely on that for my, you know, our revenue. That's what we operate off of. So that's, I think, the impact that's really, you know, out there.
And Maria Elena, you have over 3 decades of experience in journalism, and I think one thing that people often say is that politicians have always lied. I mean, those of us who grew up in Latin America are pretty used to presidents, people at the highest level trying to distort the public sphere of information, and journalists holding them to account. But what is different about the moment that we're in today? Lies have always existed, but it feels like we're in a different place as it comes to disinformation.
Because it used to be that people didn't trust the government, but now people don't trust the media. I think that's the problem. As we know, media is so important all over the world. We are the only filter that exists between people and those in power, those who are trying to control the people. But what we see all over the world in authoritarian governments, the first thing they try to do is silence the media. They do it in so many ways. They either kill you, like in Adnan Khashoggi's case, or they shut down your business, or they put you in jail, or they threaten you, or they try to discredit you by calling you the enemy of the people. So if it wasn't because we have that power, why would they be trying to silence us in the first place? So I think that whole thing about fake news was very intentional, because they didn't want the media to be believed. They didn't want us fact-checking. They didn't want us to be telling the truth. They didn't want us to push back. And that's why we had this campaign that got even worse beginning in 2016, more or less, which is, I think, when the credibility of the media started going down and down and down and down. I mean, people have always doubted the media. And I just think it's funny because they say, oh, I'm not going to listen to the media saying that. I'm just going to go straight to the source, not knowing that that source uses the media to get their message across. So what we are reporting on is what those experts are saying. It's not stuff that we're making up. And I mean, so it's like ridiculous whenever I hear that. No, the media's lying. If they knew how strong the libel laws are, if they knew all the facts and checking that we have to do, all of the standards and practices and all the legal divisions that exist in every single media outlet, at least the major ones, you know, people would understand that we are there to tell the truth. That's what our job is, to tell the truth, to denounce injustice and to uncover corruption. That's what our main job is. And people don't understand that because they have been brainwashed to think that we are the enemy of the people. Well, on the contrary, we are the voice of the people, or we are the forums in which we allow people's voices. I have to stop saying voice of the people because my daughter told me once, "What do you mean voice of the voiceless? That's ridiculous, Mom." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Everybody has a voice. They just don't all have a forum to use that voice." I said, "You're absolutely right, my daughter." So now, we have to make sure that we provide that forum, that platform to share people's voices. But it's a catch-22. We all push for, let's have diverse voices everywhere. But that could be a double-edged sword, because some of those voices that we're going to be hearing are voices that are telling lies or half-truths, untruths.
Yeah, and trust is foundational to democracy. Trust at all levels. Trust on the political system, trust on voting, trust on the census, trust on media. When trust erodes, that's when we begin to see the erosion of the very institutions that are the pillars of democracy. And Suzanne, you and I were talking right before we got on the panel about what's happening in Chile. Do you want to speak just a little bit about that before we move on to the solutions?
Just, there have been a redraft of the Constitution going on, and initially the misinformation was against the items of the Constitution, but they've turned the disinformation to against the people who are drafting it, and so now the people themselves are, in danger, and even undertaking this exercise of drafting a Constitution that might be more democratic is putting them in danger,
And the drafting of that constitution came from a social movement and citizens mobilizing and taking the streets for days and days and days and weeks, and then what seemed unlikely then election of Gabriel Boric, and now all of that work, the voting is next week, September 4th, and Sunday, the 4th, yeah, thank you. And there's been a very concerted disinformation campaign about that, and it reminds me of what it was like to be in my home country of Colombia when citizens voted no for peace. And it takes a very concerted information campaign for that to have happened.
Can I just throw in a thought here off of Maria Elena, but because I wonder sometimes how much the race issue has worsened all of this, but I also have to think back to history. And for one thing, we've lost a lot of local newspaper coverage. So the death of your local paper has really helped this disinformation, fake news, whatever, just continue, all these lies to continue and not be checked. But I also know that, to me, the election of President Obama and the reaction to it is not dissimilar from what happened when Reconstruction happened, when slaves were freed, and suddenly black people had power, and all of a sudden Jim Crow laws came in. It's this response to trying to prevent a person of color and people of color of having power. And so I think that is an issue or race itself is behind some of the fake news or disinformation or whatever lies, basically, let's just use the word everybody who's familiar with, lies, that are being perpetrated.
Sure. And I would also add, on the other side, we talk a lot about what the right is doing, but on the advocacy side, and we've talked about this as reporters, nothing infuriates me more if I'm going to a site and say it's about the death of migrants. And I go and there's an advocacy group that is now the gatekeeper, and they're preventing me to speak to the victims. And I understand that when there's organizing, you're trying to control the narrative. But if you prevent us from doing your job, that builds more distrust. And I see this happened in 2020 when I was trying to go to a union rally to get out the vote. They invited me, I was there, but then when I started talking to various union members, they went and grabbed me and said, "You're not allowed to talk. Talk to this person, these are approved." But this isn't a country where we control the media. I can do what I want, right? We're there to put up a mirror of our community. And as ugly as it is, we gotta do it. As beautiful as it is, we gotta do it. And if you try to control that, you're gonna build more distrust. And you can't sit there and say, all you write is about negative. We have problems, poverty, inequality, and we're gonna talk about it. When you get in an argument with your spouse or partner, you don't go up to her, they, he, and say, "You're in a bad mood. What's wrong? Tell me what I'm doing wrong." But you know what? Only positive, right? You're not gonna resolve anything. And if I did that to my wife, she'd even get more angry, right? Because she's gonna tell me a litany of things that are on her mind that have bothered her, right? And then I can counter, well, this is true. That's what you should do in media. And there's also the problem of what we're doing as journalists, right? We have a lot of journalists, and I'm gonna be straight with you. that do a lot of this, taking a lot of selfies of themselves and posting, doing workout videos, posting photos of they're dancing around. And that's fine if you want to be a social media influencer. But we got into this business not to take photos of ourselves, but to take photos of you, the people we cover. That's what's important. We are not the story.
No.
We are here to do our job. I got into this business because I was hungry to cover the communities that I come from. Right or wrong, all the modes. Yes, I'm going to cover that crazy Theo, right? I want to cover the people who go to church, right, and who feel they're going in this way with the evangelical movement. But even then, I'm battling misinformation. It's hard to battle with Jesus when someone from the pulpit is repeating the information, right? And it's hard to battle that. And then you push it aside and say, well, that's a question of faith. We can't discuss it. Well, okay, my faith is believing in unicorns, and my faith said I have to run over your puppy, right? See how ridiculous that sounds? Those are things we have to challenge, but meet people where they are.
Yeah, I feel like we're about to start that crazy Theo hashtag. And then you might become an influencer even though you don't want to.
Hey, that's my dad you're talking about? No.
I promised you all solutions, and this is not the panel where I could lie to you. So let's get into solutions. Maria Elena, let me start with you. What do you think people should be doing, or media should be doing, or social media companies should be doing, philanthropy should be doing? Choose whichever one you want, and let's just open up for a round of what do we need to be doing about this.
Well, I think social media companies are already trying to, or at least the government is trying to have more oversight over what they do. I think they're becoming more aware of the misinformation out there, especially the lack of control of it in Espanol. So that's important. And we in the media, it's difficult to push back because we cannot. In every single time, like you said, Russ, it's the same thing. You can't, every single time you interview a person, you can't go back and say, no, what you're saying is not true. Can we give them their voice and then after that mention the fact that, this was not, or you can't say it was a lie, you can't say it was accurate, you can maybe just say, these are the facts. That's what we do, we report the facts. Or we can make sure that we differentiate what is opinion and what is a fact. But I think one thing that we can do, even as journalists, is start with our own group, with our own surrounding, with our family members, with our friends, and make sure that we tell them, what the facts are. We make sure that we call out things. Like my sister would tell me, did you see this? Where did you see that? On Facebook. I said, yeah, but what was the source? Facebook. I said, Facebook is not a media. What was the source? Facebook. Somebody posted something on Facebook. What was the source that posted it? And she says, oh, I don't know. She doesn't understand. So we have to start with our family members, with the people that surround us. And then another thing, I know, Susan, you were saying a lot of this misinformation is race-based. We have to accept as a community that we are racist and that there is a lot of racism in the Latino community. And we deny it, but a lot of our beliefs come from that. And, I see it with my family, I see it with my friends, I see it with things that I hear. So that's one of the things that we have to begin to, number one, accept that we are, and look for ways to explain to people, no, it's not that way. No, it's not this way. I have a friend who was saying, oh, that Black Lives Matter movement, they're all communists. And I said, well, are you kidding me? She says, yeah, because they took a picture with Maduro. And I said, who took a picture? Those ladies that founded, the Black Lives Matter. I said, okay, fine. Just because you took a picture with someone, number one, doesn't mean that they're socialist. And maybe if they are, you have to differentiate the movement from the organization. Say, oh, no. The movement and organization, same thing. You cannot separate them. There's absolutely no way that you can convince someone who believes what they want to believe. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge, because we are in the era of people believing what they want to believe, going to the media outlets that tell them what they want to hear. And that is very difficult to combat.
Suzanne, can I come to you? What can we do? What should we do? And then I'll come next to you, Russ.
Listen, this is a hard question for me to answer because I'm not an advocate, I'm a journalist, right? So for me personally, I am trying very hard to get back into the Republican space. I used to have a lot of Republican sources during the Bush era, and they went away during the Trump era, and the folks that are now out there just don't want to talk to me. They don't call me. They don't answer my calls. If you deal with Governor Greg Abbott in Texas, they don't even they don't respond, or they respond, but they'll just, you know, defer you, or they'll just give you a message or whatever. So me personally, as a journalist, I'm trying to work on that. I want to talk to these people. I want to hear their opinion. I have a younger brother who is in the Trump space, and, you know, I want to understand more why he's there, and I want to understand these folks' fears and their concerns and their willingness to disbelieve or to believe. So that I think is a big part of it. I think it's very important that people know, read more about how technology works, the algorithms, how those work, that when you see a story that you know is like, oh my God, this is not true, click, let me share it with you, look how the story's not true, or you're commenting on it, you add to that algorithm. So that helps perpetuate that story or other stories like it. Facebook's own data suggests that people join, Facebook's own data says that it suggests people join white supremacist groups 64% of the time. So this is like, this is a large group, and this all has to do with algorithms. And the more you do that, the more you're going to see stuff on that feed. Telemundo is doing some things when it writes its stories. Oh, first, wait, I forgot to pitch myself. Read my stories. That's how you do. That's how you fight this. Read my story. No, but this is just a joke. Telemundo does what I think is a neat thing. When they write their stories, some of them, they say, okay, at the bottom, they say, here's where you could go get information about this. And they talk to their readers as consumers. They provide phone numbers. For some reason, a lot of us in the journalism field and a lot of journalism entities are unwilling to do this. They don't want to be a source of information, like news you can use kind of information.
Conduit, basically.
Yeah, and I don't know why that is. Telemundo is also doing a crash course with MediaWise and Pointer called Identifying Misleading Information. A good thing to check out. And also, I think there needs to be funding in news literacy programs, which are often local. I think a lot of this stuff has to go to the local level because you all know what's happening at the local level. And at some point, you know, maybe even we as journalists, I know there are town halls, it's great to get tons of people, but maybe it needs to start at a little neighborhood level and go from there.
And I would point out, there is a big difference between telling lies about the past and the present and being delusional about the present and the future. Right? There's different intents. One is to hurt and persuade you, and one is you're not being honest about what needs to be done. A few days from now, a few weeks, we're going to start Hispanic Heritage Month. And in your local communities, you will hear the same thing. There'll be the story about Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and if you're lucky, maybe Roberto Clemente or Salina, maybe Richie Valens. But you will not hear key people like Maria Moreno, or Emma Tamayuca, or Luisa Moreno, or Maria Varela, or Providencia Paredes. If you don't know those names, I suggest you look them up. Undocumented woman in the White House during the Kennedy administration. Two women who organized an event like this in 1930. If you don't have information, this can hurt us later. No information is the adolescent for misinformation. And misinformation is the young teenager for disinformation. We have an obligation, you have an obligation to fight that too. We can do our role, but you as consumers also have that right. And I would say a big role that we're doing here at Axios, we're about to launch Axios Local in 25 cities, and we plan to be in 100 cities. We want to go in places, we're already in Miami, we're going to be in San Antonio soon, hopefully we'll be in El Paso, right? And our Axios Local is led by a Mexican-American woman from South Texas.
Give it up for that, that's pretty good.
Number two, African-American Delano Massey. So we have disrupted the legacy. Now you have two people of color leading the creation of local places or local things for Axios in our format. And I also would suggest you also subscribe to Axios Latino. We can get news every day, Tuesday and Thursday, into your inbox for free.
And let me stay with you, Russell, for just a second. We are having this conversation about content moderation and regulation of social media platforms. It is pretty evident to me, I think, and to many others, that there needs to be some regulation about the role that social media platforms are playing in destroying democratic debate and dialogue by incentivizing hate speech and polarizing speech and disinformation without any accountability. But we have to protect freedom of speech. So any reflections that you have there on the role of big tech and social media and regulation of big tech?
Yeah, think of it as like a town hall square. If you have a town hall square in your communities, it's a place where you go and exchange idea. But if you have some tonto who comes in there and says, oh, you should die, and he's carrying around weapons, that person will likely be removed for the safety of the community. Now, you're welcome to say whatever you want, your political beliefs. I believe X is a socialist. That's fair. If you then make generalizations, the intent to hurt somebody, and if this information has come from somewhere else, another nation state, intent of hurting a democracy, that's when you need to have a debate. Because that's not free speech. That's aim of overthrowing us. Just overthrowing social movements, overthrowing civil societies. That's different.
And there is a difference between freedom of speech and freedom of reach, which I think is what a lot of people are debating over, what the extent of the technology companies have. And you also have to think about laws that exist today, like legal liability for tech companies. You know, that Facebook thing that I told you, Facebook can generate that kind of content and suggest people join white or get white supremacist news, but have no legal liability for suggesting they join or anything like that for spreading that kind of content. So there are efforts out there to I read a Time magazine article on this recently, and so look for that. But you know, there are efforts to try and change and update laws that govern technology. That if people are really concerned about this, whether you're an advocate or just your everyday person, this is who you need to contact your congressman, you know, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, or your local people about to try to have some movement on that. And it also has to do with, also there's laws on monopolies, on Facebook and Google being the place where advertisers who pay for our content, for me to be able to put out a story about the census director being a Chicano, they have to go through Facebook and Google, and those are the only people they have to put out ad revenue. So there's all kinds of, there are laws on that you really should look into.
Marilena, let me end with you. Any final thoughts on what we can or should be doing to defend democracy, freedom of speech, and counter disinformation?
One thing we can't do is ignore that it exists. You know, it exists, and like I said before, I think one of the first things that we could do is en nuestro entorno, you know, with people around us, is always stick to the facts. And just, I think, also push our media organizations to make sure that they give us the space to do this fact-checking, and that we try to explain things to people a little bit better. I know that we've talked a lot about all these lies about the election being rigged, and we keep saying it's not true, it's not true, it's not true, but have we really gone into detail about why it's not true? You know, sometimes people don't want to hear opinion, but perspective is important. So sometimes we need to give a little bit more perspective, a little bit more background, and do it in a way where we don't make people feel insulted. Because if you tell someone you're racist, then they're going to be even more racist, then they're going to stick to it. So, you know, we just have to find that balance of respecting people's opinion, but at the same time, in the best way that we possibly can, without violating our own oath to, you know, to our job, to our profession, is to set the record straight.
And so I promised you some solutions. And I want to recap, as I close the panel, drawing from some of the things that our panelists shared with us, and add a few more from my side. I think there was a call for greater understanding, greater listening across the aisle. That is quite important. We have to remind ourselves that we want to understand why people are victims, why are they vulnerable to dissent and misinformation, why are they taking the positions that they're taking. It is important to find more research to document harms of disinformation, particularly harms to vulnerable and marginalized and minoritized communities. It is very important to get smarter and quicker about how to do fact-checking. That disinformation machine is a machine, and I was telling you at the beginning of this panel, it is moving fast. And there is not enough journalists with enough funding to be countering every lie at the speed at which it is being produced. So there's organizations like Full Fact, for example, in the UK, that as a politician is speaking, it automatically transcribes the speech, identifies what is fact-checkable data. It is looking to verify that data automatically to assist reporters on conducting that fact-checking. We need more of that, more automation of fact-checking. We need to increase the reach of quality journalism. And there's some interesting experiments. Club Media is doing that, for example, with Armando Info in Venezuela and others, on how do you actually make articles that have quality information be more engaging, more interesting, use multimedia data to get deep investigations that would be hard to read out there to a greater public. We need greater diversity in the newsrooms at all levels. More Latina women running newsrooms, more Latina women owning media corporations will be less likely to produce disinformation and xenophobic and hate speech, xenophobic information and hate speech if we have the right people telling stories about the communities that they come from. We have to advocate for better regulations. The regulatory framework right now is insufficient. Laws from the 60s and 70s about regulation of media and technology are not enough to hold the social media companies accountable and to speak truth to power. We have to speak truth to power of those who are dominating and controlling the public sphere of information. We have to do more media literacy, more investment, and philanthropy, and I say this as someone who works in a philanthropic organization. We have to commit more resources to digital and media literacy for the Latinx community. And finally, we have to shift the narratives that are allowing this and misinformation to really flourish, and we have to shift the narratives about our community in very proactive ways. Narratives don't die. They just get replaced. So we have to be thinking about the ways in which we both call out injustice while also creating space for imagining a more inclusive world and democracy where we belong and where we're empowered to drive the decisions that impact our lives. So with that, let me ask you to join me in thanking this incredible panel.
No more dancing. Thank you guys so much. This morning we heard from Mariana Burelli and Kayla Castaneda on building businesses that will lead to a more sustainable future. To learn more and support each other, to learn more and support each of their companies, you can find Kayla's company, Agua Bonita, at drinkaguabonita.com. And for Mariana Burria's company, check out AMAI.mx. AMAI.mx. All right. I can't believe y'all are leaving me. So cold. That's cold. We just getting started with this afternoon's program. Go get a little cafecito and then come back, okay? We have so much more programming here for you guys today. From a panel on misinformation to now a fireside chat on the importance of education. This is why we need us here. College attainment has helped Latinx community members close significant gaps in recent decades, including the wealth and income gap, and opening pathways for upward mobility. The COVID-19 pandemic has posed a risk to higher education attainment, with enrollment declining during the pandemic. This fireside chat will provide insight into college enrollment and attainment, as well as some of the obstacles and opportunities that exist to support Latinx students across the nation. To begin our chat, please welcome the Assistant Vice President of Strategic Advancement, Arizona State University, Dulce Vasquez. Yes, and the President
Bueno,
of the
sí.
Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, Dr. Antonio R.
Camina. Rico, rico, rico.
Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. I know it's a long
Y como dice mi coro que sigue ahí.
We are following up this disinformation panel, and I think education is one of the best ways to combat misinformation. So I think this is perfectly placed. As you heard here, our main speaker today, Dr. Antonio Flores, CEO, Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, or we call it HACU, where he has led the organization since 1996. HACU was founded in 1986 with 18 members, and now you have over 500 members in 38 states. And one of the most recent additions to an HSI designation, Hispanic Serving Institution, was Arizona State University, where I work. So thank you. Well, I want to start off. People always talk, the old adage, which I heard from my abuelito, is education. That's the one thing that can't be taken away from